The government is hiring someone to evaluate the economic impact of vaccination while trying to sneakily push changes to the Canada Labour Code to mandate COVID-19 vaccines for all federal employees. Mary Ugolini here with Rebel News, bringing your attention to this tender put out by the National Advisory Committee of Canada to hire someone to provide guidelines for the economic evaluation of vaccines. The tender reads, to conduct an economic evaluation following the recommendations outlined in the National Advisory Committee on Immunization guidelines for the economic evaluation of vaccines in Canada. The economic evaluation will serve as a worked example to the NACI economic guidelines and will be available as a supplemental chapter. The economic evaluation will also serve as a cost-effectiveness evidence for NACI and will be provided as a report. The contractor will work with various groups, and those groups will provide technical expertise and advice for the contractor in conducting the economic evaluation. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization, acronymed NACI, is run by the Public Health Agency of Canada, that's PHAC. The agency has expanded the mandate of the NACI to include systematic consideration of programmatic factors in developing evidence-based recommendations to facilitate timely decision-making for publicly funded vaccine programs at provincial and territorial levels. The additional factors to be systematically considered by NACI include economics, ethics, equity, feasibility, and acceptability. The economic process requires, of course, an economic evaluation and budget impact analysis. Part of that process includes a skeleton flowchart reference where question 1 starts off with simply, is there a need? The whole flowchart looks like it was made by a kindergartner. All of this is accompanied by a lot of word salad. The key takeaway, I think, is that this is all for federal vaccine recommendations, not mandates. But if COVID has shown us anything at all, it's that governments can act de facto and switch on a dime to indiscriminate enforcement over anything that they deem as emergent. That's our tax dollars hard at work. Not only do we have to pay to procure these vaccines deemed necessary by government entities, but we have to also pay for the economic evaluation, apparently, and of course, the salaries of those who deem themselves holier than thou and capable of making personal medical decisions for the general public. It also begs to question why this is taking place now. Shouldn't an economic evaluation have occurred before rolling out 80 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Canadians, for instance? But this tender comes at a time when regulatory initiatives are being undertaken to develop COVID-19 vaccination requirements under the Canada Labour Code. The description reads, COVID-19 remains a hazard that threatens the occupational health and safety of federally regulated employees in the workplace. Through new standalone regulations under Part 2 of the Labour Code, the government will require vaccination of federally regulated employees, except under very limited circumstances. The new regulations will complement existing occupational health and safety measures, such as masking, hand washing, and physical distancing, to provide further protection against the risk of transmission of COVID-19 in the workplace. This developing regulation would impact all federally regulated employees, and as a result, they are expected to benefit from the protection afforded by increased COVID-19 vaccination rates, reduced transmission of COVID-19 in the workplace, and by extension in their communities. When transmission does occur, those who are vaccinated are expected to benefit from reduced negative health outcomes, but there's no guarantee there, and their semantics prove it. They're expected to benefit. That doesn't mean that they necessarily will. So continuing on, apparently consultations with stakeholders on this regulatory proposal took place in December of 2021, and regulations could be published in Gazette 2. But wait, was anything published in Gazette 1? For reference here, the Canada Gazette is the official paper of the Government of Canada. The government is supposed to publish proposed changes to regulations in here to solicit comments from Canadians. It's supposed to be the vehicle that allows you to send comments or concerns to the appropriate department or agency so that you can actively participate in Canada's regulatory process which is our democratic right, so that you can comment on proposed regulations. It's broken down into Part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 is for proposals to get feedback. Part 2 contains regulations that have been enacted, and Part 3 is basically for legislation already being voted on. So this whole federal vaccine mandate was first announced in a news release on December 7th of 2021. The Minister of Labour, Seamus O'Regan Jr., announced that the Government of Canada will propose regulations under Part 2 of the Canada Labour Code to make vaccination mandatory in federally regulated workplaces. The government will consult with key stakeholders, including representatives of small and medium-sized employers, as it works expeditiously to finalize the new regulations, which would come into force in early 2022. So this should have appeared in Gazette 1 somewhere in December, you would think, except that this proposal to the Canada Labour Code doesn't appear to have been published in Gazette 1 at all. I searched each Gazette published in December, and the closest I could find was the one published on Christmas Day, but the proposed regulation is about amending Part 3 of the Labour Code, which pertains to standard hours, wages, vacations, and holidays, and there appears to be an exemption under the interim order mandating vaccines for ship workers. Nothing about Part 2 of the Labour Code about occupational health and safety or mandating COVID-19 vaccines across all federal employment sectors. So I reached out to the department contact, Brenda Baxter. She's the Director General for the Workplace Directorate and Labour Program. I asked which federally regulated stakeholders were consulted and what was their feedback. Was the initiative published in Gazette 1, and if they could provide a link? If it wasn't, why? Number 3, will the regulations be published in Gazette 2? If not, why? And if so, when? And lastly, if there was a copy of the forward regulatory plan from December 10th, 2021 available online, and to please provide. Someone named Marie responded with a paste from another entity, and they tell me everything I already know and have outlined in this report. On December 7th, 2021, the Government of Canada announced its intention to develop regulations under Part 2, Occupational Health and Safety, of the Canada Labour Code to make vaccination mandatory in federally regulated workplace. They do clarify that regulations have not been brought forward to date. The Labour Program undertook consultations with federally regulated stakeholders, including representatives of small and medium-sized employers from different sectors in December. The department has been receiving feedback from stakeholders on an ongoing basis. The Labour Program is continuing to follow public health advice on COVID-19 and to hear perspectives of federally regulated stakeholders to determine the approach moving forward. A copy of the December 10th, 2021 Labour Program Forward Regulatory Plan was published online and is attached above for reference. They allege that on January 31st, 2022, a select number of regulatory initiatives, in some cases their timelines, have been updated, and they provide a link. I already did the homework on that last sentence. The regulatory initiative for this federal COVID-19 vaccine mandate has not been updated, yet it still says it's expected to come into force in early 2022. Once again, the Government of Canada responds with information and links that I have already searched and sifted through. I had questions regarding the very same links and the information that they sent back to me as their reference. I literally already went through it all. So naturally, we filed an access to information request to find out. You can support this kind of investigative journalism and help me in getting clear answers from our very own government by donating to offset the costs associated with this research at rebelinvestigates.com. Even though the appropriate contacts can't answer my questions, there has to be communication somewhere. And I want to know what stakeholders the government had consulted and what their feedback was. This is federal jurisdiction after all, and we're taxpayers. This should be public knowledge, and it should have gone into the Gazette 1. And that feedback with the regulations should be published in Gazette 2. So I've asked for all of that communication as well. This is especially timely if these regulations are supposed to come into effect sometime early 2022. We're already halfway through March. That timing is literally right now. This just seems so sneaky. For Rebel News, I'm Taxpayer Ugolini. We're 2 years into this madness, and it looks like the fight against vaccine passports continues. We've undertaken an initiative in partnership with the Canadian registered charity called the Democracy Fund to help people legally who are suffering at the hands of indiscriminate enforcement of these mandates. And it looks like that work won't be over anytime soon. We've successfully crowdfunded for this initiative at fightvaccinepassports.com. If you visit that special website, you can view all of our cases and stories on this topic, and of course, chip in if you're able to assist. That website again is fightvaccinepassports.com.